Hello, and welcome to my review of these Leupold BX-2 Alpine HD binoculars. These happen to be the 1042 version. They come in several other sizes, 1050, 1250, if my memory serves correctly, and I think an 842, but we have the 1042. But before we take a close look at the binoculars, we are going to see what's on the box. I'll bring that up there so you guys can get a good look at it. Pause it if you want to read those. The important specifics on there are the 10 power magnification, the 42 millimeter objective, and our 342 feet field of view. And if you prefer it in degrees, it is 6.5 degrees. Other things that might be important to you are the exit pupil, 4.2 millimeters, and the eye relief of 15 millimeters. Other than that, they do state that they're 100% waterproof. You know, take that for what it's worth. Obviously, nothing is 100% waterproof, but I guess that means that they should hold up to a good dousing or possible temporary submersion. In the box was this rather nice case. I've only had a couple chances to use it. It's performed well. When you get the glasses or the binoculars in there, this little guy hooks on there nice and easy. It's easy to open. Also in there, which I'm not going to get out, is the harness. It's just a big old jumble of straps, and it's not worth looking at, but it does come with it. What it did not come with was a regular neck strap. I would have preferred that to the harness, but Leupold, chose to give you the harness instead. And it comes with these lens covers. That one would obviously hook on your lanyard if you had one, or your neck strap if you had one, and then these two just pop open and remain on the binoculars. But I'm going to slide those off so that we can take a closer look at the binoculars in general. What did they say on here? For weight, they said 24.1 ounces. We're going to go ahead and check that real quick. And we get, let's put the lens covers on it. They might be including that in the weight. 24.6. So we're right there in the ballpark, half an ounce. And a little light if we do not have the covers. So the weight is accurate. All right, so we're going to start at the back with our eyepiece, our eye cups, which are the detented. They kind of go up and then they set back and lock into position. They have pretty good resistance. They're not going to collapse just by pushing on them. And then there's also a full out position there at the top, which locks in as well. So you got 1, 2, 3 positions. I find that I usually use them in or in that first position. I rarely have them all the way out at the top. But you may differ. It's just going to be what feels comfortable for you. Then moving forward, on our right side of our binocular, we have our focus for our eyesight. So if your left eye and your right eye aren't exactly the same, this little guy right here is going to allow you to balance the focus between the left and the right so that when you adjust your center main focus, they are correct. And speaking of that, we have a pretty decent wheel that's easy to access from either the top or the bottom, whichever way you prefer to do it. The damping, I would actually prefer it to be just a little bit stiffer, but it's consistent, it's even, until you right at the one end, it gets a little tight there, and then you go the other way, and it gets a little loose at the other end. It's just a little looser there. But it doesn't grind, it doesn't hang up anywhere in there, and the tension for most of the rotation is consistent. What else? It does have a rubberized protective coating on there, which gives you good traction even without the little knurling they have on there. And then on each side, we see our lanyard or neck strap holes. I keep calling lanyards, but you can put your neck straps on there. One thing to be cautious of is the fact that that hole is pretty narrow. And so if you have like a stiffer leather strap, it may not want to fit through there. So a nylon one might be preferable, or find some other small adapter that would fit through there so you can use whatever neck strap you want to use. And then we get to our center knuckle. It has a good tension. I've seen a bunch of binoculars lately where this is really just like too tight, but this one's got a good amount of tension on it. It's easy to adjust if you need to just make a small adjustment. You're not feeling like you're going to crank on the things real hard to make that movement. And then on that knuckle, we have our tripod socket. And this is where you would add a little adapter if you want to mount this to a tripod, a bipod, monopod, whatever. It comes with the socket for that. That is a 1/4 20 thread pitch, pretty standard throughout the industry. You're going to find those pretty much everywhere. And it's just covered up by this little stylized logo cap that's plastic, plastic threads as well, which I would wish that they would make these things out of aluminum at least, so that those threads would be a little stronger, but they don't. So just don't over tighten that thing. But you know, if you put it on there finger tight, I haven't had any one of these fall out, but you don't want to over tighten it and break those threads off in there because they're plastic and they might if you really crank on it. And then as far as the body overall, we have this gray coating on here. It's a soft rubber armor, so that if you drop these things, it's going to bounce as opposed to like nick it up or scratch it. Or if it does damage it, it's going to help protect it, the internal, from shock, just because it's got that softer outer coating, which extends all the way up here to our 42mm objective lenses and kind of curls over the front. So if you did set those down on something rough, it's not actually touching the hard body of the binoculars underneath. It's going to rest on that soft coating. And my one criticism on these, this design wise, is I wish they would have added like maybe a 1/4 inch or 4mm, 5mm, just to give you a little bit more depth before you get to that lens. Just because I always worry about if I drop those on something like gravel or whatever, that a rock might be tall enough and pointed enough to get in there and hit that lens before it actually contacted the body. But that's just my own concern. I've never actually had that problem, but I just wish they would set those back in just a little bit more for that added protection. But with that being said, I think we've covered pretty much everything that we need to cover here at the bench, and we're going to go ahead and get outside and get this set up for looking through it and see how well the binoculars actually perform, since that's really the important factor of any pair of binoculars. So we'll do that, and I will be right back with you when we are outside. I now have us set up out here to take a look at some things in a little bit different format than usual. I usually use the floodplain, but the crops growing down there right now are making that impractical because it's blocking a lot of the view. So I have brought us out here to a construction site where we can see some sort of practical, everyday sorts of things that you might actually see in the real world. So we're going to start right here. Give you some range references. The fire hydrant that you see down there in the bottom half of the field of view is at 85 yards. The boxes there in the center are going to be at about 125 yards, and the blue arm telehandler is at 150 yards there against the wall. And one of the first things to notice here is that the line of the concrete sections up there towards the top is not exactly straight. That is because we are experiencing just a little bit of fisheye. We're going to see that as we continue to pan down the side of this building. That is not what I want to talk about at this moment. I want to just kind of take a look at the general sharpness of the image that we're able to see here and some of those other details. I currently have us focused on the fire hydrant, but I am going to tweak it just a little bit to bring the telehandler into focus. And you can see how with just a little tweak of the focus wheel, we have a nice sharp image. Our color representation is very true to what I see with my naked eye, and the overall sharpness is good. The chromatic aberration that we see on the darkened doorways, there's a little bit, there's some color fringing, especially as we get out towards the left and right edges of our field of view, but there in the center, actually looking quite nice. We can also make out quite a bit of detail, even in that little tarp that's flapping there in the wind. Just the different light reflections off of there, they all look pretty good. We're not getting any weird colors on that blue of that tarp or of that telehandler. What I'm going to do now is go over to the ultra wide lens and get a little bit more detail, because I'm going to go over to the wide lens, which is the higher resolution. That's going to give us a little bit more detail here at this distance, and I'm going to switch to that right now and give you that view. All right, as I stated, I got us moved over to this other lens so that we can get a little bit more detail in the center of our field of view. You will notice that as I use this lens here throughout the rest of this review, that we're going to see a little bit of fall off in the sharpness out there towards the edge. But that is not what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the details that we can see in the back of those boxes, the individual labels, the banding holding that pallet together, as well as if you look very closely, there's little green squares in the corner of each one of those boxes. That is a tip and tell, or a shock sensor of some kind that the shipping company puts on those things to see if the boxes have been handled in a rough fashion, which, given the state of that pallet, I have very little doubt that it has been handled in a rough fashion. But as we move up here just a little bit to look at the arm of this telehandler in the man basket, we can see all kinds of detail on there. We can see the blue genie, which is, not particularly high contrast against the gray paint. We can see the backup yellow and amber lights, and we can even see the segmented nature of that cable management system that goes up the side. That's the black bit and the silver bit as it goes up the side of the main beam of that arm. And what is also important to notice is the general lack of chromatic aberration here in the center of our field of view, where that dark doorway is contrasting against the very bright white painted concrete of the wall. I'm actually very happy with this image. It's looking pretty darn good. But next I'm going to pan back down here just a little bit. We can see how our fire hydrant there at 85 yards is a little bit more focused now that it's come in from the edge of the field of view. I'm going to pan to our right to some other boxes and things. Right about there. That's going to give us a little bit of an idea of the scale of the fisheye that we're going to see with this thing. As I keep that seam between the gray paint and the white paint there at the top, you can see the flex in that. But down there and towards the middle of our field of view, we are looking at those individual safety cones and also the darker tarp behind it, and just the good color representation where they're easy to make out. Even though that dark color behind it is not a nice flat color, we're still able to see good contrast between those two colors. That's about all I want to look at here. I'm going to flip us back once again over to the ultra wide angle and move on down this building to look at some additional things. So now that we've had a chance to look at that wide angle where we had a little bit more resolution, even though we did have a little bit of the fall off in the edge clarity, we were able to pick out some more of the details on the blue tarps and those cones that we're seeing right there in front of us, which are also at about 130, 140 yards. So from here I am going to pan up on the building just a little bit, because I want to look at the top of this building as we pan, and we can see how the line there that's almost exactly in the middle of our field of view, get this situated properly, is going to remain pretty straight, but the line of the top of the building and where those flags are is going to show us that fisheye as we pan down our building. Get this mount freed up so we can go nice and easy. You see as that top line migrates towards the center of our field of view, it tends to straighten out a little bit because the fisheye is less dramatic there in the center of our field of view. I'm going to pan down just a little bit so we can get a look at this next piece of equipment. I'm going to fix the focus real quick. I have that focus set where I want it, and that is going to give us a pretty nice image. That set of scaffolding and the telehandler are at approximately 275 yards. The blue Johnny on the Spot is going to be at about 230 yards. And just as a reference, the light pole right in front of us, the concrete base with that water bottle sitting on it, is right at 100 yards. You can see how that water bottle is just not quite focused. The depth of field is not quite that generous to be able to focus on that 100-yard base of that light pole and our 275-yard scaffolding. But it is not a terrible image. You can tell that that is a piece of yellow caution tape wrapped around that thing. But what we want to look at more closely is the details in that scaffolding. We can make out the difference between the yellow rails at the top and the red scaffold sections there, the pipework that builds that thing. We can see the difference in those two colors pretty plainly, as well as the orange cones and the orange, I believe that is also a telehandler out there next to the building. And here we see the chromatic aberration in those dark doorways a little bit more clearly, as we have those darkened doorways out there towards the extreme edges of our field of view. But overall, still performing pretty well. Just need to see if there's anything else I need to point out before we go ahead and pan down the rest of the building. I'm not going to do the wide field of view at this distance. I am going to do it again when we get out here to the end of the building, which is just a slight rotation away. Still seeing some of that fisheye as the edge of the building goes off the left edge of our field of view. It starts to tip up a little bit more than it should. It's got just a little bit of flex in it. So here is kind of our next spot that I want to stop. Get that brightness under control and tilt this down just a little bit so we can focus on that little trailer right there with all of its words and marketing stuff written on it. Get this, there we go, got that light brightness where I want it. And so that trailer is going to be at, let me measure it again. Trailer is at 360 yards. The yellow excavator just to the right of it, behind the green porta potty, is going to be at 400 yards. The porta potty is at 375. The end of our building, where the gray, why is it not ranging, is at 425 yards. So that just gives us some idea of the distances that we're looking at now. I guess I can give you that power pole there in our front of our field of view next to those orange barricades. That is 150. The little orange barricades are at 200 next to that dump truck. Alright, so I am going to check my focus real quick before we talk too much about this. Alright, so I actually had to make very little adjustment to that focus, maybe just a 2 or 3 degree rotation of that knob to get the focus where I wanted it for the approximately 400 yard end of that building and that red and white trailer. And so with that, it being our point of focus, we can see that the berm behind it at over 500 yards and that orange armed excavator are also in focus, as well as the orange telehandler and that pickup truck with the trailer behind it on the left side of the white trailer are also well focused. What is not going to be tremendously well focused is the grass down here at the bottom of our field of view. You can see that it's grass. You can pick out some of the individual plants, but all of that is just a little bit fuzzy because our depth of field is not that generous. I am going to go ahead once again and flip over to the wide field of view and give us the more high resolution image. So I will do that quickly and we'll take a look at that before we move further to our right and look at some objects that are well beyond 1,000 yards. So now I have us on that other lens, as I was saying, and we are able to make out quite a bit more detail on the back of that trailer, as well as on the side of our orange telehandler. You'll have to forgive the loss in clarity out there towards the edge of our field of view. That is not representative of what you would see with your naked eye. You would have effectively the same sharpness of image all the way out to the edge, with the allowance for that additional chromatic aberration in those high contrast areas. So the fuzziness that you're seeing in this image is purely the camera phone not liking the optics of the binoculars themselves. But I do want to point out just some of the fine detail that we can see. If you look closely on that black piece of equipment, you see the words, the word deer, D-E-R-E, and on the one behind it you see the word Bomberito on that orange handle, as well as the number 350 there on the frame of the tractor itself. And then on the berm in the back we can see some of the details in the dirt on that hill. Again, that is about 550 yards, something like that. And then as far as getting a little bit closer to us, if I bring it over to the center, we have our giant dump truck. and we can make out quite a bit of detail in that dump truck, the wheels, and even the dirt, or the rock pile in front of it. It's doing pretty well, and we're just going to go ahead and pan past this next one, that Komatsu, looking pretty sharp, got very little chromatic aberration. Even on the back side of that, the yellow side that's being brightly lit by the sun, we're not seeing a bunch of funny color fringing on that either. And we'll just continue panning, get over here and look. We can see the details in the doors and the sides of that Conex box, where we can see the hardware, as well as the little anchoring lifting points on the corner of the one that is, side on towards us. And then the last thing we're going to look at here with this lens is going to be this mobile crane, where we can see the individual bits of lattice work that make up the crane arm going up the side there, as well as the Link B logo there. And we can see the crane cable going down to the hook where it's attached to the front of the crane. And we get a look at the truck as it goes by, which that truck is going to be at about that 550 yards. And overall, I think we have a really nice image at this distance, between 350 and 500 yards. And I don't see really anything to complain about. So we're going to go ahead and flip back over to the ultra wide lens and continue to pan to the right. So with us back on the ultra wide lens, we are going to continue moving to our right across this road and looking at some additional buildings and equipment that are going to range a little bit further out. If you've seen my spotting scope or rangefinder reviews, you may recognize this as a water treatment plant. We're not quite as far away as we were in the rangefinder videos, but that is just because these are only 10 power binocular, and I felt that this distance from here to those big green tanks on top of the building, we're looking at about 950 yards, and the white storage tank there on the right side is actually at about 1200 yards. And even with the sun in a less than optimal position, we are still getting a pretty good image. Let's see if I can fix that brightness just a hair, make it a little bit better contrast. It's not want to cooperate. Yeah, that's a little better. So what we have here in front of us is a pretty busy landscape. We got that orange handled excavator, we got that green porta potty, we have our large chemical tanks, but what I really want to focus on is going to be the ladders and the rails of that chemical tank, where even with these 10 power binoculars we are able to see those details pretty clearly. Fortunately, today the mirage is pretty low, and so even those handrails up there on the top of the tank and the individual flats of the stairs are not shimmering around and moving around too much. There's maybe just a tiny little bit. But even at this distance, 950 to those 3 tanks and 1200 to that white tank, we are not seeing a whole bunch of chromatic aberration, even though our image is starting to get a little blurry, just because the distance is starting to get out there pretty far. And so to help with that a little bit, I am going to once again flip over to the wide angle lens and take a look at those in a little bit more detail. But at this distance, we have still a reasonably good depth of field. That first power pole there in front of us that we can see is going to be at about 85 yards. The most distant one that we can see out there, which is going to be the 5th one, is going to be at about 400 yards. So that just kind of gives you an idea. And though they do have a little bit of curve, you can see the tops of each one of those power poles is starting to tip a little bit to the left. They're on the left side of our field of view. They're not extremely bent by the fisheye. So anyway, I'm going to flip over to the other lens and let you guys see that building in a little bit more detail. So like we saw at the other distances, the high resolution camera does give us a bit more detail there in the center of our field of view, and we can pick out even more of the details of those stairs and the rails on top as well as the letters at the top of that green porta potty. And if you also look closely at the arm of our excavator out there, we can see the 3 letters CAT. That is obviously the brand, the manufacturer of that piece of equipment. And then as we pan over here, looking past the orange man basket on that telehandler, which is going to be at about 600 yards, we can see the American flag flapping back there in the distance. I don't know the range of that because I just don't have a way to range it, but I know that it is in excess of 1,400 yards because the brick building that you see kind of obscured by the man basket is at almost exactly 1,400 yards, and that flag is at least 100 yards beyond that. But overall, really doing a pretty good job. Our color representation, even out there on that flag at that distance, we can see the red and the white and the big blue square. The red and the whites are obviously blending together a little bit. I don't think that that would make any difference if that flag was hanging flat, but the flapping in this breeze obviously is not helping. We can also make out a fair amount of detail in those trees back there between the sunny branches and the shadowed areas. And as I pan back over here one more time, we're going to take a look at that 1,200 yard giant tank. And on the very top of it, we can see that there is an access door and some handrails up there as well. And overall, I think that this set of binoculars is doing a pretty darn good job. But I don't think I have much else to say about it, so I am going to wrap this up and take us on back to the bench and kind of give you my final thoughts. So here we are, back at the bench. We're going to try to put a bow on this and wrap it up fairly quickly. I brought some notes just to kind of keep myself on target, not get off in the weeds too badly. And I am going to start with the pros that I have about these binoculars. The first one being the image quality. The clarity and the sharpness that we saw, especially on that ultra wide view, was actually really pretty good. I didn't really have any complaints at all. There was some fisheye. It wasn't aggressive. The color correctness was spot on. If I had to say anything, it might have just a slightly warm tone, which skews just a little bit to the more yellow gold kind of tint. But if you don't have something with a more blue-green tint to compare it to side by side, you're really not even going to notice it. But I did notice just that slight hue to the overall image, and that's just going to be an aspect of the coatings that or Leupold has chosen to put on those. But it is in no way a hindrance to the overall image quality. And then my next pro is just the general utility of these. They're a good size. That 10x magnification with the 42mm lens is going to provide you with more than enough field of view for almost any application. So just these things are just a general purpose binocular that's going to do most things pretty well, even if you're using them at the shooting range trying to look at targets for impacts. As long as you're not shooting like 22, those holes might be too small depending on the targets you're shooting at. But if you're spotting for somebody else shooting, they're going to do a pretty good job at that too. And then my last pro for these is just the availability. Almost every sporting goods store that you're going to go into is going to have these for sale. So you're not going to have to hunt for them. You're not going to have to try to order online and take a chance. You can go into a store, pick them up, look at them, and just get an idea of whether or not they're what you want. So then we'll move on to my cons. The first one is that they do not come with a neck strap. I'm not a fan of the harness that comes with these. I like the pouch. I just wish that it had an accommodation for a neck strap. The fact that it doesn't is sort of a bummer to me because I carry binoculars on my neck 99% of the time when I'm going to take them with me. Otherwise, they're going to be in a backpack. I'm not going to promote this strap because honestly, I'm not very happy with it. But it is the one that I used for the last couple of months while I was using these binoculars. But I'm not going to talk about that. My next gripe is going to be the eye cups themselves. This edge around here is just a little too hard and a little too sharp. I wish they would have made it a little thicker, a little wider, so that when you have it against your eye socket, it doesn't feel like it's pressing in as much. It does have a little bit of rubberized squish to it, but it's just, you know, I'm being a little dandy, and I felt that they were a little too aggressive when you're kind of getting them pressed up against your face. I just like to see them be a little softer. Perhaps if you had these for years on end, they would soften up a little bit. I've only had them for a little over 6 months, and they're not my favorite. They're not bad. I do like the set two sides, or the two positions. I think they're pretty well spaced. I just wish the cup was a little softer. And then the last thing that I forgot to mention when I was doing the intro, and I don't see it on here anywhere, but these are made in China. I know for some people that's a problem, so I just want to include that because I forgot to mention it at the beginning, just because when I was looking at them, it doesn't say it anywhere on here. But I looked it up, and they are assembled in China with Chinese glass. That being said, you know, they do a good job. If you don't have a problem with them being made in China, then that's not a problem. But if you don't want to buy something made in China, then these are not going to be for you. So that brings us kind of to my last talking point, which is, who do I think these are for? And that is going to be just really anybody looking for a decent pair of binoculars that's got, you know, a budget of around $200, and they want something that's got a lifetime warranty, that if there's an issue with it, the manufacturer's going to take care of it. I've only ever had to use Leupold's warranty one time, and that was on a 1.5 to 4 scope that the illumination had died. I sent it in, they sent me a fresh one, and I didn't have any issues with that warranty process. So I assume that the binoculars, you know, are going to fall into that same camp. If you have a problem with them, get a hold of Leupold through their warranty process, and they'll get you taken care of. Then I just briefly mentioned the price. I paid what was it, like $160 for these, but I bought them open box off of Optics Planet. A normal everyday street price is going to be somewhere between $180 and $250, with a $199 kind of being your normal sale price, especially when you get around holidays. So just figure you're going to look at about $200 for these things. And I think that's all I have to say. If you have made it this far, you should hit that like button, maybe leave a comment if you have any experience with these. Also, if you know of any binoculars that you would like to see reviewed, leave that down in the comment too. I'm always looking for suggestions. Lastly, if you do enjoy my content, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and you'll be notified when there is more. But with that, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.